All right, so Alexi, if you want to come up and read our passage today. So as we've been going through the Sermon on the Plain right now, we're reading the whole sermon each time to the point we're at. So Alexi's going to read where we've been through so far as well as where we are today. Alexi, do you want to rest your Bible in here? Okay, here you go. You can follow me. Perfect. Yeah, let's stay.
And he lifted up his eyes on his disciples and said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you shall be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you and when they exclude you and revile you and spurn your name as evil, on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven, for so their fathers did to the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you shall be hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when all people speak well of you, for so their fathers did to the false prophets. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. And as you wish that others will do to you, do so to them. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. For he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. Judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. He also told them a parable. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher.
Thanks, Alexia. So if you haven't been able to figure it out yet today, our sermon topic is judgment. We're not looking at God's judgment today, but we're talking this idea of us judging one another. And if you're here this morning, if you have a pulse, which looks like everyone here so far, then I'm willing to bet that you have felt judgment from another person before. That you know the pain, the hurt, the rejection of feeling judged. You may have been vulnerable with someone else. You may have shared private details from your life in confidence to another. And then later on, you felt like that person took your confidence and turned it towards you and judged you and condemned you using your own trust with them against you. Or you may have gone through a hard season of life or taken some of the struggles or the challenges you're going through and you brought it to a friend, but rather than receiving compassion and care, you received judgment and condemnation from that person. But what really breaks my heart the most is that all too often people experience that, even in church. Even from the church community, they can experience judgment and condemnation. I recently was having coffee with a friend. I won't say his name, but we were getting coffee. I knew he wasn't a Christ follower. I never had been one. And so I just asked him, like, hey, like, have you ever considered Christianity? And he said, no, not so much. And I said, how come? And the reason he gave, again, kind of just broke my heart. The reason he gave is because he said, like, I always felt judged by Christians. It's like, why would he want to look into that if that had been his experience? And, recently there was a book, Unchristian, that came out, and through their study, through their surveys, what they found was that the number one reason, people leave church or leave the Christian faith is because they feel judged. And I think for some of us, that might be something that we might want to gloss over, except that, every single person in this room has either, personally experienced judgment, from others in the church, or they've, know a friend they've, know someone intimately who's had those horror stories. And so today I just want to talk about that, like this whole idea of judgment, like, of how can we be people who are, not quick to judge, that are not intentionally hurting or even unintentionally hurting people through judgment, but how can we be people who are living out Jesus' words here today? Because some of Jesus' words are for sure, like really hard to even understand. But I don't think these words are. I think they are pretty clear to us. Jesus says in verse 37, "Judge not, or you will be judged. Condemn not, or you will be condemned." And so the first thing you might be wondering is like, well, what exactly does it mean to judge? Let me give you an example here real quick. Imagine you came to me, and you came to me with a little bit of a quick get-rich-quick scheme, and you said, hey, I got this email, and it's this Nigerian prince, and he says that if I give him $1,000, there's something issued going on at the bank, he will send me $10,000 back. Now, if I said to you, bro, I don't know if that's a good idea. Like, I've heard about these. I think they're a pretty common scam, and I really don't want to see you lose your money and get scammed. That wouldn't be judgment. That would be, caring and looking out for, a fellow brother or sister. But if I said, are you kidding me? You're such an idiot if you fall for that. You're actually such an idiot for even considering that. That clearly is judgment. Judgment is essentially making a value judgment about another person. It's about taking someone's, possibly, flaw or even our perception of their flaw, whether it's real or perceived, and it's saying, that's who you are. That weakness in your life, that struggle, that thing you're going through, or even just like, sometimes our judgments can be totally wrong. They can be flat out wrong, but it's essentially saying whatever our perception is of another person, that thing, it's this value judgment of saying that's who you are. And so judgment stings, but why does it sting so badly? And I think the first thing is because it feels like it misrepresents us. When I was in high school, I remember the first time I visited Chicago, I went with my parents to the Hancock Building. And up at the Hancock Building, there was a caricature artist doing caricatures for free. And I always remember saw them at the amusement park. But like for us, we didn't have a ton of money, and so going to the amusement park was already a big deal enough, so I couldn't ask for a caricature. And if I did, the answer would have been no. But I saw they were giving them away for free. It was already part of the price of the admission. And so I go and I sit down, I wait my turn, and I get my caricature done. And the whole time, it's facing away from me, so I can't see it. And I'm so excited to see, what does my caricature look like? And I'm like, what is it going to do? So you can emphasize, a feature that I might like to look better. Maybe Lauren always laughs at this, but maybe he's going to give me really big cheekbones or just a really big smile or dimples or something. But instead, he takes the feature that I've never even been self-conscious about, my chin, and he just elongates it. He makes it huge. And the last thing I would ever want to do, I always like the idea of, I've been to other friends' house and they hang their caricatures up, but I hated this caricature. It felt like such a misrepresentation. It felt like such an over-exaggeration. And that's what judgment is. Judgment all too often, it's like this quick reaction, and it's saying sometimes it can be totally flat out wrong, but other times it can be taking our flaw, and it says that's who you are. Your flaw, your struggle, you at your worst moments, you at your worst day. It's saying, that's who you are. When someone calls us an idiot, when someone is sexist or bigoted or any of those things to us, and they call us those things, it's saying that's who you are. And we want to say in return, no, sure, I might struggle with those things, but that's not who I am. It's just something I've done. And so judgment is always taking the things we do or the things people thought we've done and saying, that's who you are. And so I think the other reason why it hurts so badly is because whenever, think back to a moment when someone has judged you. Like you can just sense judgment. You can feel it in the other person's eyes. And there's this sense that other person is intentionally trying to tear you down and build themselves up. And I think that's why we're almost so cautious even of being judged by another, because we've all known that, we've all experienced that feeling of another person essentially tearing us down and at the same time building themselves up. But at the same time, if we've all been judged, if we all know that feeling, that hurt, why do we also then judge others? Why are we quick to judge others when we also have been hurt so badly by judgment? Well, again, Jesus' words, he said, judge not or you will be judged. I think the first reason why we judge is because, we've been judged. We felt the hurt and pain of judgment. We know what it's like to feel torn down by another's judgment. And so in response, the easiest thing to do is to then turn that right back around. When someone has torn you down, to then tear them back down. Because when we tear them back down, we can kind of, feel like we've kind of regained what was hurt and what was lost in us from their judgment. And so I think that's kind of the first reason we do it, is because when we've been hurt, we want to also not just hurt them, but we want to kind of tear them back down to size. Yeah, she's not perfect. He's not perfect. She's still a bit of a hot mess. They're still a bit of a wreck. We tear them back down as well so that we are, feeling a little bit better about ourselves. But I think the other reason we do it is we all know we're flawed. No one's perfect. We all know that. No one would even claim to be perfect. And yet when we see another person's flaws, I think there's almost a little bit of excitement we can feel sometimes, at least me. I don't want to speak for you, but we can feel a little bit of excitement about we see their flaws, and in some sense we feel better about ourselves. We usually pit our strengths against other person's weakness, and we can feel a little bit better about ourselves in that comparison. But you might be thinking to yourself, well, why is Jesus so against judgment? I mean, this is a short sermon he's given. He could have talked about everything. He could have talked about murder here. He could have talked about adultery, incest. I mean, there's so many other things he could have talked about. Why use judgment on his words? Why use judgment on his few words? Well, as we look at kind of this sermon, I'd say the main idea so far I've been at least noticing this sermon is Jesus is really asking us, are you living your life according to the way of love? Are you modeling your life after the way of love? And Jesus is saying, he doesn't want us to have this shallow, self-serving love that's saying, I will love you as long as you love me. Treat me as well as my needs are met. That's not the love that Jesus is calling us to at all. And I love, what Amanda shared, because essentially she said she felt that as well. Jesus isn't calling us just to have a love where it's we serve as long as we've been served. But what Jesus is saying instead is he wants us to have this deep, generous, self-giving, other-centered love that says, I will love you because God has loved me. And so judgment is kind of just doing the exact opposite of that. And so notice again what Jesus says. After he says, judge not and you will not be judged, condemn not and you will not be condemned, Jesus goes on to say, forgive and you will be forgiven. He starts saying these positive things. Give and it will be given to you. He's not talking about finances here. He says, given it will be given to you, a good measure pressed down, shaken together, running over will be put into your lap. For the measure that you use it, it will be measured back to you. Now that last line, I remember the first time I read it, I was like, what on earth are you talking about there, Jesus? And I'm guessing that most other people feel that same way, unless you really know the context well here. But what Jesus is saying here is he's taking an image from the marketplace. In their culture, it was totally a barter system. And what he's saying is, the first time, if you're buying, let's say, corn, the first time you're buying these corn seeds, if someone just right away gives you one scoop, fills up your bucket, your measurement, and then they say, go away, that's not a true measure. Because there's going to be all this empty space. And so what Jesus is saying is a true measure is where you shake it back and forth so that, all the kernels go down and combine more hard. And then you can put even more stuff on top of it to have a true measure. And what Jesus is saying by that is he's saying, that's how we all want to be treated. We want other people to be generous in their measure with us. We want us to have an overflowing measure from them. One of the quotes I said last week that I got from someone else I think is so helpful is this idea, we judge others by their actions, but ourselves by our intentions. And so what Jesus is saying here, he's not saying being generous financially. He's talking about being generous in our interpretation of others. Not being quick to judge another person, like being generous and forgiving, being generous in our interpretation, being generous in giving another person the benefit of the doubt. And the reason then why God then would be so against our judging is remember back to verse 36, which was the last verse of his words right before he says, do not judge. Jesus says, be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. So the reason that Jesus is so against judgment is he says, like, if in one hand you receive the grace and mercy of God, and yet with your other hand you give out judgment and hostility and you're condemning, like he says, like, that's hypocrisy. It's hypocrisy to in one hand receive grace and on the other hand give out judgment. And as I hear those words, it reminds me of a parable that Jesus once told about a servant who goes, he owes this really large debt to his master, and he goes to his master, tells him he can't pay it, and to his master, like, he says to him, well, I forgive you of that debt. And he must have felt great at that moment, being forgiven of this large debt. And yet right away he turns around and he goes to someone else who owes him money and says, it's a far less smaller debt, and he says, hey, like, you need to pay me that money or, I'm going to have you thrown in prison. And Jesus says, like, when you receive my grace, and yet you go and you condemn others, that's what you look like. When you receive my generosity and you turn around and you judge others, you're quick to judge them, that's what we look like. It looks like hypocrisy. It's not the way of love. It's the way of self. And Jesus says, like, this is so critical because this is not who I want you to be. I want you to be people that model yourself after me, who model your love, not as other people have loved you, but model your love after God has loved you. So how do we do this? What's the way forward? Because, you might be hearing this, you might be thinking, is the way forward then to just not speak in anyone's life? I don't think that's exactly what Jesus is saying here. He's more calling us to love others in a way that's like not, to correct others in a way that's not attacking their self-worth. To correct others in a way that is not condemning them, but is rather encouraging them and is reminding them of the grace that Jesus has given all of us. So how do we do this? What is the way forward here? How do we correct without condemning? Or let's say, like, you really, you're coming in here today and you have that hurt from past condemnation. Again, like, what's the way forward with our hurt from others? And Jesus, he gives us a parable here in verse 39. He says, can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. And so I think Jesus is saying here is if you've been hurt by others' judgment, we need a teacher, we need a mentor, we need Jesus as our guide, because if we've been hurt by others, like, our natural tendency is going to be to perpetuate that judgment and hurt another again. And so we need his help if we're going to choose a different way. As Luke said in a past sermon recently, hurt people. That's our natural temptation, our natural inclination. We need Jesus' help if we feel tempted to judge. We need Jesus' help if we're going to check our pride. And we need Jesus' help if we feel obligated to correct. If we're going to do it well so that we don't do more harm than good, so that we don't, in attempting to help another person, end up hurting them and leave them feeling condemned, shamed, and wounded. So for all of these, again, Jesus is calling us to live in the way of love. To live in a way that is offering grace rather than condemnation, offering generosity rather than judgment. But here's the thing. When any of us think about any problems in someone else's life or even our own life, like, think about like what it takes for you to actually act and reach out for help. For us to reach out for help on something, like, we really have to see our problem as big. Because not until it's really big and we see how massive this problem is that we're really ready to take action. And notice again, like, what words Jesus used here. He said that we were blind. And so Jesus, what he's going to tell us in a second is he's going to give us an example just to show us how blind we are when we judge, to show us how big the problem is, so that we'll be ready to reach out and ask for his help. So check out verse 41 with me. Jesus says, why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, brother, let me take out that speck in your eye, when you yourself do not see the log that is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take out the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to take out the speck that is in your brother's eye. And as I think about Jesus' words here, I would much rather have him say, before you take out the log in your brother's eye, take out the speck first in your own eye. Because I would say, yeah, Jesus, that makes sense. I need to do this quick heart check before I, challenge my brother or sister. I can do this quick heart check. Got it. Check yourself before you wreck yourself, check yourself, and then go. And then I can take out that log for them. Because if someone, again, if I see their bigotry, their sexism, if I see their greed, their lust, their anger, I see that they have the bigger problem. Jesus, it's obviously that the other person is really the one with the problem. That's why I'm judging them. Because they're the one with the problem. But do you know what Jesus says? He says, oh no. What I'm telling you right now is that you, when you judge, when I judge, when you judge, he's saying, we actually have the log. We actually have the bigger problem. And I feel for me, that's really unsettling. That's really uncomfortable because I just want to tell Jesus, no, Jesus, you're flat out wrong. That's why I'm judging them. I'm judging them because they're the one with the problem. But let me just tell you a story real quick here that I think will hopefully help us see what Jesus means here, see why the one who's judging actually does have the bigger problem. I try not to use the same story too often in a sermon, and I should, though, just embrace it as part of my personality, because when I'm at home with Lauren, she tells me all the time, babe, you've told me that story so many times, or she's like, babe, who told you that story? I told you that story, so... So I just need to embrace it. It's who I am. I'm a story repeater, so here's a story that I'm going to repeat. I was talking on the phone to my mom maybe about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago now, maybe even longer. But I was noticing a family member who was struggling with this issue, and it was with indecisiveness. And as I saw their indecisiveness, I actually was firsthand witnessing how this was negatively affecting another family member. Their inability to act and to take action was actually perpetuating a hurt in another family member. And as I was talking to my mom on the phone about this, as I was venting to her, she could hear my frustration and my disdain. And I want you to know that I didn't think I had frustration or disdain. I mean, definitely had frustration, but I didn't think there was any disdain in my voice. But what she said to me was very telling, because she said, Matthew, when your mom calls you by your full name, you've done something wrong. She says, Matthew, he doesn't need your judgment. He needs your compassion. And I think before I would wrestle with this text that I could hear my mom's words and I could just say, okay, you're right. I need to do a quick heart check, and then I can take out the log in this other family member's eye. But I think when I really wrestle with Jesus' words here, I realize that Jesus is saying to move from judgment to compassion, that's not a speck level issue. Think about that. To move from judging another person to actually having compassion for them, that's what it takes to really help another person and to love them and to truly correct them in a way that's building them up rather than tearing them down. To move from judgment to compassion, that's huge. That's something that is really hard to do. That's something I can't just do on my own. And so that's, I think, why Jesus is saying the person who's judging has a log in their eye, because imagine, Jesus says, first take out the log before you even try to take out the speck. Imagine if in that situation, if I had not taken out the log, which, I definitely didn't do. And thankfully I didn't say anything. But imagine if I had just left that log in my own eye and I had said something to this other person. How would have that gone? Do you think they would not have picked up on my judgmental attitude, of my condemnation? Of course they would. And so they would have felt hurt. They would have felt personally attacked, and the result of that would have been that they would see me as this punk. They would see me as this self-righteous person. But then on the flip side, when and they also wouldn't even be ready to talk about it or deal with it because now they feel ashamed, and so they don't even want to look at it. But then on the flip side, when it comes to me, I would be left feeling so much more prideful. I would feel so much more prideful because I'd say, hey, I was challenging them, and they couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle the truth. They weren't even able to handle that. And so I would have left feeling so much more prideful about myself. I would have left feeling smug and self-righteous because I gave them truth, but they couldn't handle it. And so Jesus says, until we take out that log, we're going to do so much more damage than good. It's until we take out that log that we can actually bring compassion and love to this other person. Until we actually bring out that log, we're not ready to actually love the other person. We're not following the way of love. Until we bring out that log, all we can do is condemn and judge. And so how do we take out the log? How do we truly live out the words of Jesus here? I think if you are I know Andrew is he's an incredible reader. I'm so jealous, Andrew, of just how good of a reader you are. And so if you're a good reader like Andrew, which I am not, you might have noticed that compassion actually isn't in this text. The word does not appear. But at the same time, if you know like what the real word compassion means, then I think you also know that like, it actually does fit really well. It really is the answer to judgment. The word passion, what it originally means is to suffer. And so if you'll notice like, the narrative of Jesus suffering and death, like that's called the passion narrative. And by passion, you might have thought that was weird, but it means like this is his suffering on the cross. And so, when Jesus suffered on the cross, like, he's taking our judgment in our place. And when we judge another person, like the issue with judging is that, we can't live up to our own standards. When I'm driving on the freeway and I get so mad that someone wants to cut in late, it's so self-righteous because I always cut in late as well. Not always, but like I do it often. And so like, it's so bizarre, but like I'll be cutting in late, but then someone has the nerve to cut in late after me. And then I'll get so upset about it. And I'll be judging that person of like, how dare they cut in late? And so the issue is like when we judge is like none of us can live up to our own standards of judgment, except one. Jesus is the only one who can rightfully judge because he's the only one who can actually live up to his standard of judgment. But rather than judging us, like what Jesus does here on the cross is that he takes our judgment instead. He takes our judgment and he offers us grace. And so that's why we need to come to Jesus for help. We need to come to Jesus for help not to judge because he was the one person who was able to take our judgment upon himself and instead offer us grace. And so I think that's really why Jesus and God sees judgment as so disgusting is because, he has offered us grace. And if we've received that, and then he says, like, how can you then offer condemnation, offer judgment instead? And so I hope all of us feel like just can kind of recognize that all of us can judge. Like, if you've been judged, like our natural temptation for all of us is to judge. And so if we're going to have any hope of instead of judging back, we're going to need compassion. We're going to need the help of Jesus. Now, let me real quick say what compassion is and what it is not. Compassion is not minimalizing what someone has done to you or how someone has judged you. Compassion is not minimalizing or saying, actually, it wasn't that big of a deal. What they did really wasn't wrong. I just need to see it from a different, lens. I just need to look at this from a different view. No, compassion is not minimizing or neglecting like the wrong of what has been happened. But what compassion is it's not being quick to make a judgment. Compassion is willing to enter in and suffer with the other person. Compassion is willing to look at someone's whole story and say, like, hey, like this person is more than just what they've done. Like, they have a whole story here. And when I look at this person, rather than just judging them for the one thing that they've done wrong or the one struggle they have, like I can see that they're a whole story. Compassion is when I look at their story of saying like that I would automatically have done a better job if I was in their same circumstances. If I had experienced the same things of them, had the same challenges in life, had the same story. Like compassion is not just saying that we automatically would assume that we would have done any better. But compassion is instead knowing that we've received grace. And that's the only reason why we can extend it back. The only way I can give someone grace who has given me condemnation is if I know I've received grace when I deserved condemnation. And so as I end here, I just want to just say that, like, if you're coming in here today and if you don't have your life perfectly together, I just want to say, know that you are at home. At Village Church, we have people that struggle with all sorts of things. We have people that struggle with anger, with lust, with porn, with addiction. Like we have people that struggle with greed, with envy, and all of other sorts of things. And Village Church is led by two pastors, Luke and myself, who are two broken men. And the longer you are around us, the more easily you are going to be able to notice our flaws, our weaknesses, our shortcomings. Like, we are two flawed and broken men. And right here, I would love to promise you that at Village Church, that you will never feel judged. But you, just as well as I know that, like, I can't promise that to you. I can't promise you that I'm not going to judge you ever any more than you can promise me that you will never judge me. But what my hope for you is that at Village Church, you will find a place of grace and forgiveness. A place that even though you may feel judged in moments, you will ultimately know that you are loved. The Village Church is a place that doesn't want to judge you or condemn you, but wants to love you and consistently point you towards the finished work of Christ. That in Village Church, it's a home where no matter where you are on your journey, no matter where you are with Jesus, that it is a place that points you towards the unending grace and mercy of God, a place where that you are not judged, but a place where you are loved. Let's pray. Father, I just pray right now, Lord, for each person in this audience, Lord, who is hurting, Lord, from the judgments that they have received, Lord, from the condemnation that was not deserved, from the judgment that was not deserved, from the pain that they have experienced from that, Lord. Lord, I pray that they would have not only empathy for the other person, Lord, but even empathy for themselves. That none of us can respond perfectly to judgment or condemnation, Lord. But I pray, Lord, that you would give them the power to forgive, not because that a person deserves it, but because you offer us forgiveness, Lord. And I pray there would be a freedom found, Lord, as we release judgment from other people, Lord. That we'd experience the freedom of Christ, the freedom that can only be found in you when we release people of the judgment that they deserve, Lord, because you released us from the judgment we deserved. And I pray that as we experience your grace and your mercy, Lord, that it would be a contagious thing, Lord, that our whole life would be formed and shaped by that we would truly experience the freedom that you promised us, the freedom that you came to give us, Lord, as we release people from our judgment and our mercy, Lord. And so, Lord, each of us, we don't want to release that, Lord. We feel they deserve it, Lord. And so wherever anyone is here today, Lord, I don't condemn them if they can't, because I can't do that fully either, Lord. But I just pray that you and your Holy Spirit would be continuing to work in our life to trust you, Lord. Because ultimately, any decision in our life, that's really what it ultimately comes down to you, is our trust in you, Lord. Can we trust you, Lord, enough to release that judgment? And I pray we would lean into that today, Lord. I ask all these things in your Son's holy and precious name. Amen.